Coming to you from the Safe Space Studios, I'm Brodor, and this is a Why We Game product review. I guess technically it's a review of multiple products. In this video, we're going to go behind my GM screen and look at some of the tools and trinkets that I use to make for an easier game for me to run. But before we get into that, let's talk about my screen itself. Now, I'm a big advocate for using a GM screen in most games, particularly in any game where I'm going to use dice, because as any somewhat not green game master is going to know, sometimes it's nice that the human beings on the other side of the screen don't actually see the result, and we can navigate the story accordingly. Now, I like to have the screen to do that, number one, but two, the screen itself really does tell everyone at the table that I, as the adjudicator of the rules, right, as the master of ceremonies, as the game master, I have a different responsibility to the game. Not separate, just different from what you do. And I like having that. I like that it says that our roles in this game are somewhat different, and it literally delineates between the two. I like to have a space to hide stuff, not just my roles, and I really like to have access to charts and other information that I'm going to find useful. So for me, being able to have a generic screen that will go from one game to the next was really, really ideal. And so years ago with Savage Worlds, I discovered these generic Game Master screens. Now, I don't know who made them back then, but now today, while I was at Gen Con last year, I got mine from Hammer Dog Games, and they make these sweet 8.5 by 11s that go portrait or landscape. They unfold, they're double-sided, and you can really, really do a lot with them. Now, me, for example, with my game, I used it during my previous Dungeons & Dragons Midnight campaign, and one of the things I did is had a personally designed roster of all the PCs and their primary armor classes and saving throws and things like that, so I wouldn't have to keep asking them pertinent questions and the game would flow a bit faster. But then on the front of it, I could print up whatever art I liked that went with that campaign or even with that terrain, and I could have the environment of the game illustrated somewhat on my screen. Now, it sounds like a lot of work, but it makes for a slick game. Now, for my current Savage Worlds game, I'm using one, and I've got, sorry about the glare, but I've got some cool pictures that I just did on Word, and it unfolds and what have you, and it goes out really, really big. This bad boy actually is going to stretch out, like I said, 4 wide, but in a weird twist of coincidence or irony, mine happened to break this very day recording this video. And so I'm excited to see what Hammer Dog has to say about customer service and how long these things are supposed to last. But the world's greatest screen from Hammer Dog Games is going to run you about $30. Now, I don't think that's a terribly unreasonable amount of money for something that is heavy duty as this is, assuming that what happened to my hinge this very day is an anomaly. But all in all, I was very satisfied with it until about 10 minutes ago. Real quick, had to do an addendum. Turns out that the world's greatest screen is not even nearly as good as I was giving it credit for a few minutes ago. Mine broke again, and then it started to split yet a third time down the middle. So I'm going to have to go with a big thumbs down on the world's greatest screen. For $30, I cannot recommend. All right, so that's the screen. The first thing that I jump to when I'm starting a game is this little Sony Recorder. Now, I know that it doesn't do anything that your phone cannot already do, but I like this for two reasons. One, it's really durable, and I got a cheap one, but it can go in my pocket. It can travel around with me. I can leave it on the table, and it really puts up with a lot of abuse from me. It's been all over the country to different conventions. I've recorded many hours of role-playing games with it, but also interview content, etc. I love the darn thing, and for like 20 bucks, it'll pick up my whole table. Now, the second reason I really dig it is that because it's not my phone, it is not a distraction, right? It's not a distraction to me. It's not a distraction to other people being in the center of the table. Because it's a phone, no one's tempted to pick it up and dicker with it if it makes a little indication. Now, I know I can turn all of that stuff off, but the thing about a phone on the table is that one phone, in my experience, invites more phones at the table. And there are groups out there that say that they're disciplined and that they can deal with it, but I don't want to tempt the fates. So for me, everybody at the table knows that I'm going to be recording for my own personal notes. Not that I don't have a small notebook behind the GM screen or off to the side, but this really allows me to go back and have the opportunity to analyze the game, analyze my game mastering, and really take clear and concise notes about what happened at each game and what was important to each particular character or player at the table. You know, I don't have stenographer money. If I was rich and I could have an employee to do that, I would pay someone to do stenography of all of my role-playing sessions. But that is a fantasy for another time. The sands of time, or sand timers. I got mine via Chessex some years ago. I want to say they were like $1.50, $1.60. I've got a 1-minute timer and a 3-minute timer. I can use them for myself so I don't lose track of the pace of the game. More often than not, there's something that gets set on the table from behind the screen to the full view of the players, sometimes with little or no explanation. I find it's a great source of drama at the table. It is a great motivator for people to know that there's a time crunch, but not necessarily understand why there's a time crunch, and provided that it is not abused or misused and you do not too oft cry wolf, I find it's really very useful for helping create that tension at the table. Now, I love miniatures, or toy soldiers as I usually call them, and I've got a lot of different trinkets and things that I can use for my toy soldiers, but the laser pointer is something, or target marker, or target lock, depending on where you get them, but a laser pointer is something that I find really useful. A traditional pointer I have to, hey, I'm going to point at this miniature and ask, would someone at the table please move it from this square to that square, or I can use it to indicate an area on a map, to indicate a room or a specific region or a location or a mountain or what have you. I really like having one, and I find it quite helpful, particularly because we'll use a whiteboard or a bulletin board. I have two, a regular whiteboard and a cork board. So sometimes I'll use the laser pointer to point at either one during a role-playing game session. So I love having one. I got mine from the Army Painter. They were like 11 bucks. I know there are cheaper, better ones out there, most likely, but I got one from my FLGS, and it was easy because right next to it was has a separate one for the same price, that $11, that makes a big long red line. Now I love that one because you can use it to demarcate things on the battlefield, you can use it for line spell effects, you can use it for line of sight, or sometimes depending if you want to get tinkery with lights and angles and how much a torch or spell light goes into the next room through the doorway, and you don't have one of those fancy computers or tablet game boards and you just want a little laser pointer that does it. I find it super useful. I really dig having them, and your players kind of like having them too. It's a great argument settler for both sides. I find that it works very well with the miniatures and the terrain, but I know that's not everybody's bag. All right, if you use miniatures or you're gaming on some sort of tabletop, whether you're using terrain or not, you need some way to measure, right? A ruler, or maybe you have a measuring tape, right? And I like having these, but I find that the 12-inch ruler doesn't really work all that great for me. I find the versatility of the tape measure to be very nice, but again, it's an indulgence because this is going to cost you about $7. But from litco.net, I have this 1-inch linear gauge, and it's got, a few different sides, but it's got a 6-inch side and a 3-inch side and a 2-inch side and a 1-inch side. And what I like about it is, the world is not written in squares, right? So if you want to move somebody at an angle, or you want to check a shorter distance, or you're playing with some weird tinkery rules, and you need that 3 inches for some reason, because in Savage Worlds 3 inches is short range for a thrown weapon, right? Whatever. This is the kind of thing that, as Alton Brown would call it, is a multitasker. You can use it for a ton of different games, and I find that especially in a game like Savage Worlds, where your pace is 6 or 6 inches, or with a lot of the D&D style games where your standard move is going to be 30 feet or 6 inches, these things work really well. But some people have evolved past the square, and they just play on a table that has terrain and doesn't use inches at all. So if you're playing on that kind of game, these are super sweet. But Litco makes something for me that was even next level. And that is the elevated RPG damage and spell template. Now, it's going to run you about $30, but this thing does it all, right? It has all sorts of spell effects on it, and it actually, if you put it on the table, you can put it right over your figs, you can look right down on top of it, you can run your laser pointer right through it and it still works. You just bring a laser point right through that shit. It's awesome. I love the darn thing. And even though I do a lot of Savage Worlds and I have old world Litco templates for Savage Worlds in acrylic that still work with any edition, I like to have this behind the screen. And if we are playing a Savage Worlds iteration that has miniatures, I may want to deviate from those traditional spell shapes and sizes, and this gives me a broad range of square, circle, and triangle. I found that it is super kick butt. Now, I use a ton of Litco stuff, but this item and the previous linear gauge in particular, those are the ones that super ring my bell. So, a couple things from behind my screen. I hope you found this enjoyable. Subscribe or go to Patreon, Why We Game, and you can look for other exclusive content there, or tell a friend, or yada whorish begging. Hey, it's Brodor. It turns out that the world's game... Hey, it's Brodor. Quick addendum to what it is that you're about to watch. Turns out the world's gate... Look at all my pieces. I got my pieces. I got my screen. I got my screen. You can see the reflection. It's a poo-poo. A poo-poo.